Don't panic if the bridge is broken. 8 Iron Skills have a magic formula: hanging needle measurement to find the child's heart, welding reinforcement to strengthen the metal, repair the rear bridge, drive to Peshawar. In order to repair the rear bridge that was broken in 2 halves, the master first needs to use the chain drop to assist. The rear bridge is transported to the rotating platform responsible for maintenance. In order to splice the broken rear bridge, the master first polished the rear bridge side to prevent the rear bridge from being out of center during the subsequent splicing. The elbow tube also needs to be polished because the shape of the rear bridge is quite special. The positioning ring was not used to find the overall concentricity. The masters can only install and compare several times. It feels that the inappropriate position is polished flat after several attempts. The gap and angle of the joint are no longer a problem. Then you can enter the splicing process. At this time, the master needs to weld a lifting ring to fix the rear bridge shaft tube during the subsequent splicing to ensure that the overall concentricity of the rear bridge is not a problem during the splicing. During the splicing, the 2 masters assisted by dropping the chain. In this way, the gap and angle of the joint can be controlled. After the overall horizontality is observed and there is no problem, the master can then use electric welding for simple welding and fixing. Although it is a simple welding and fixing, the masters also need to spot weld the entire fracture to fix it, because it is late at this time after simple welding. The next day, the masters still need to use a scraper to measure. Although the rear axle is measured, the overall concentricity has no deviation. Then the fracture can be welded later. The fracture of the rear axle is more tricky. In order to perform detailed welding on the fracture, the master needs to use a sledgehammer to knock the rear axle fixing bracket that is in the way, burn it through electric welding, and flexibly use the only tools to remove the fixing bracket. Fu did not directly weld the steel plate on the outside this time. He wanted to weld the reinforcement ribs on the main stress surface of the fracture. In order to embed the reinforcement ribs into the interior of the rear axle, Fu first made a mark with a marker pen in order to install these reinforcements prepared in advance. Some of the positions drawn at this time, the master only needs to use the gap to cut. Only when the gap is cut can the reinforcement be installed. When cutting these 3 gaps, it is very simple. The master can skillfully operate with steady techniques. The holes for reinforcement have been cut very quickly. Then welding can be carried out. In order to facilitate welding, the master needs to use welding rods for simple fixation. The reinforcement is installed in the appropriate position. The next operation is to carry out detailed welding. This welding process is complicated but not simple. The master responsible for welding needs to have superb welding skills. Although being able to ignite is a 3rd level welding bow, judging from the master's welding techniques and regular welding points, it is at least an 8th level welding bow. Through superb welding techniques, the master can skillfully control the direction of the arc. For reinforcement, judging from the welding points, the master's welding skills must be top-notch. For beauty, the rear axle that was broken into 2 halves has been repaired. What do you think of the master's repair skills? If there are 10 points, how many points would you give?